stories we are following tonight. South Korea proposes talks next week with the North on coordinating the first reunion in 3 years of families separated by the Korean War. And visits by Japanese cabinet officials and lawmakers to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine on the anniversary of the country's surrender in World War II draw global criticism. Plus massive carnage in Egypt, the country is reeling from its bloodiest day since the 2011 revolution, prompting fears of a civil war, while the United States leads a chorus of international concern about Egypt's crackdown on demonstrators. We have these stories and more next on Primetime News. Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Friday, August 16th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us. We begin with South Korea's proposal for talks with the North next week to bring families living apart in North and South Korea together for at least a short visit.
Seoul's Unification Ministry offered dialogue with Pyongyang on resuming reunions for families separated by the Korean War. Our Hwang Sung-hee has more.
Seoul's Unification Ministry said Friday that it has offered to meet with the North for Red Cross talks next Friday on the South Korean side of the truce village of Panmunjom to discuss a range of humanitarian issues, including the resumption of family reunions. The proposal comes after South Korean President Park Geun-hye expressed hopes on Thursday that reunions for the divided families could happen sometime around the Korean Thanksgiving holiday, which falls on September 19th this year. Millions of Koreans were left separated during the Korean War in the 1950s, and the Unification Ministry says that more than 80% of the 73,000 registered separated family members in the South are over the age of 70. The last round of reunions took place in 2010. Meanwhile, the Unification Ministry said it will begin discussions with the North next week on forming a joint committee that will manage their jointly run Kaesong Industrial Complex. The draft proposal, which has already been written and is currently under review, will be delivered to the North through the Inter-Korean Hotline. The ministry said that a team of 30 maintenance men will visit the factory zone on Saturday to inspect the conditions of the facilities there. Once they are done with their inspections, Kaesong resident companies will be allowed into the border town to individually check their factories. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea and the United States are scheduled to hold a third round of military negotiations next Thursday and Friday here in Seoul.
The two sides will attempt to narrow their differences over how to divide the cost of U.S. troops stationed in the South. Seoul and Washington were far apart in their last round of talks in July. South Korea currently picks up 40% of the bill for the nearly 29,000 U.S. troops stationed here, but the U.S. wants Seoul to pay a larger portion, reportedly up to half of the total expenses, or around $900 million. The agreement that lays out South Korea's financial obligations for U.S. Forces Korea expires at the end of this year. Over now to the global reaction to a controversial war shrine visit in Japan. Japanese cabinet members' trips to the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors Japan's war dead, including Class A war criminals, drew criticism from global media outlets.
They expressed concerns about Japan's denial and glorification of its history of aggression. Kanya Lee reports.
The visit of 3 Japanese cabinet members to the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo on Thursday has raised critical reviews of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe from the foreign media. Germany's daily paper Der Tagesspiegel stated that Abe's irresponsible actions of allowing his top officials to visit the shrine incited protests and criticism from neighboring countries like Korea and China. The report said that Japan had never truly made amends for invading and occupying the territories in the early 20th century. French daily Le Monde, in a report, said that the shrine visit, which glorifies Japan's past militarism, provoked the protests by neighboring countries. It also revealed that although Abe did not visit the shrine himself, he made a personal offering to it. Meanwhile, French news agency AFP noted that Abe broke away from practices of former prime ministers by omitting any expression of remorse over Japan's past military aggression in a speech on Thursday, which marked the 68th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. The Washington Post, in an article, said that Abe strategically avoided visiting the Yasukuni shrine to try to reduce diplomatic tensions, but then showed his support for Japan's imperialistic past by sending officials in his place and making an offering from his private funds. Looking forward, the report added that the way Abe addresses Japan's history will affect relations not just with Korea and China, but also with the U.S., who wants Japan to reduce the regional tensions. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Now, at the National Assembly here today, lawmakers questioned a former spy agency director and ex-Seoul police chief accused of abusing their authority to meddle in last year's presidential election.
Both denied the charges against them. Our Kim Yeon-ji has more on the parliamentary probe into the country's spy agency scandal.
Former National Intelligence Service Director Won Se-hoon and former Seoul Metropolitan Police Chief Kim Yong-pan took the witness stand Friday. The two men refused to testify under oath as witnesses at the hearing, saying that doing so could negatively influence their trials. Former spy agency chief Won was indicted for ordering a smear campaign online to sway public opinion in favor of then-ruling party presidential candidate Park Geun-hye before the December election. In his testimony, the former spy agency director said he did not violate election law in any way and denied that he ordered agents to post political comments online before the election. He said the NIS under his rule was most concerned about North Korea's cyber threat.
As NIS chief, I focused on monitoring and keeping an eye on the pro-North Korea faction in South Korea, because North Korea's cyber attacks against Seoul began to strengthen in 2009.
Former Seoul Police Chief Kim, who is awaiting trial on charges of whitewashing a police probe into the NIS scandal before the election, was adamant about his innocence.
I deny the prosecutor's written statement in its entirety.
Specifically, Kim is accused of releasing the results of an internal police investigation that concluded no political comments posted by an NIS agent were found. Prosecutors say Kim knew at the time that was false. The results were released at 11 p.m. on December 16th, just as the final televised debate between presidential candidates was ending, only 3 days before the presidential election. Ruling party lawmakers say the two witnesses did not break any election laws, while opposition lawmakers believe Won and Kim used their authority to influence the outcome of the presidential election in favor of the ruling party. The parliamentary committee will have 2 additional sessions to question additional witnesses next week. Kim Yeon-ji, Arirang News.
As President Park Geun-hye continues her push to promote fair competition as part of her so-called economic democratization, Korea's #1 internet company, Naver, has been coming under fire for allegedly abusing its power.
The case has added to the debate about the line between excelling in the market and corporate bullying. Yu Lian shows us an example of the latest controversy surrounding Naver.
This service called Memo This allows users to stick a memo on any website. Take, for instance, this YouTube page that shows an ad for Apple's iPhone. A user can post a video of Samsung's Galaxy ad as a memo right next to it. So when other Memo This users visit the page, they can directly compare the two. The startup company that developed this service says they got off to a good start in 2009 after acquiring a number of patents abroad. But Naver, Korea's major portal website, shut down the service on its website back in 2011, saying only that it disrupted Naver's business model.
There's no point in coming up with an innovative service if there's no way to reach the consumers. We've been stripped of our chance to compete fairly.
Naver can have this effect on companies because of its dominance over the web in Korea. Ever since Naver operator NHN was established back in 1999, the company has grown at an exponential speed, with annual profits spiking to over $2 billion last year. Naver now holds over 70% of the search engine market share in the country. But lately, the company has become the center of public scrutiny after being accused of abusing its power. Under President Park Geun-hye's drive to foster a fairer business environment for smaller businesses, the Fair Trade Commission launched an investigation into Naver for anti-competitive practices. And the ruling Saenuri Party is to introduce a regulation law for Naver next month. NHN declined repeated requests for an interview, only reiterating what CEO Kim Sang-won said earlier this week. Kim vowed to continue to work closely with related government officials, but also expressed hope that the government does not rush to create regulations that could limit the company from competing globally. Yuri-an, Arirang News.
For an expert's take on whether Naver's hold on the search market was fairly earned, we bring in Professor Lee Sang-seung of the Department of Economics at Seoul National University in the studio. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The Professor Lee, would you say Naver is a bully, and have their business practices hurt Korea's cyber ecosystem?
Well, I think that's a very hard question to answer. Naver's critics surely allege that Naver is a bully. But at the same time, we should think about why Google, which is #1 search engine in the world, is not gaining any traction in Korea. I think the most important reason is that Naver has succeeded in bringing to market the services and content that Korean consumers want. So Naver should not be allowed to abuse its power, but at the same time, we should not tie Naver's hands in competing vigorously.
Right, but nevertheless, the government is proposing a so-called Naver law to curb the expansion of the company for whatever reasons. What will the law do, and how will it change the user experience of Naver?
Well, I think the government goal is to let open competition flourish in the internet ecosystem. But as I said, we should not have a regulation label that ties its hands. For example, there are many criticisms raised against Naver's webtoons, the comic strips that you can find on Naver. But Naver webtoons is very popular among Koreans. According to recent data, 1 out of every 3 Koreans read Naver's webtoons at least once a month. It's that popular. So in the process, other small webtoon sites and also comics publishers offline might suffer some competitive harm. But we should look at matter from the consumer's point of view. So on the one hand, we should let Naver compete vigorously. But on the other hand, we should not let Naver abuse its power.
Now, more on the controversy, I mean, some worry that this regulation would hurt innovation, but at the same time, some others argue that the innovation will be stifled without it. So what's your take on this?
That's a certain possibility that by having a specific regulation on Naver, we actually hurt innovation in the internet, Korean internet system, because Naver is not only competing against domestic portals and search engines, but also competing against Google and Yahoo, these big global firms.
Well, speaking of the other web search engines, how will Naver's competitors, especially Google, react to this legislation?
Well, it's an interesting matter that the Google actually has been under intense investigation by the competition watchdogs in the U.S. and in Europe. So I would not say confidently how Google would react, because if they say, for example, criticize Naver for certain conduct at home, they might get the same criticism that they level against Naver.
So what would you say is an ideal way to balance the two, innovation at the same time fair competition?
Well, I think we should certainly let the small innovative internet firms to flourish in the marketplace. I think what's important is to have funding available to them so that if they have good business model and business idea, they can get money from venture capital and develop their business model and attract consumers so that they can compete against established search engines and portals.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor.
Thank you.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features restrictions is on the rise. Closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report. Less than
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
meeting came on to We're trying to cover up the South.
Now, taking it now to Egypt, where violence is escalating in the streets. Supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi called for renewed protests on Friday, a warning of more chaos to come in the country. We already saw more than 600 people killed and some 4,000 injured earlier this week. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
The eyes of the international community are focused on Egypt after government forces stormed civilian camps with armored bulldozers. In the latest violence Thursday, supporters and members of Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood set fire to a government building near Cairo, while funerals were being held by families and friends of the fallen. This comes a day after at least 638 people were killed, as security forces were given the green light to use live ammunition to break up the camps of pro-Morsi activists. The protesters have been staging sit-ins for weeks, demanding the reinstatement of overthrown President Mohamed Morsi, who was ousted by the army last month.
A friend of mine's brother passed away, and I came to visit him and to help him as far as the legal paperwork for processing the body. It was told that he can't release the body unless he signs that he died of natural causes, and of course he's unwilling to do that because he was shot in the chest yesterday at Rabaa al-Adawiyah.
U.S. President Barack Obama condemned the latest violence in Egypt and canceled a joint military exercise that was to be held between the two countries. The U.S. State Department also says it will review aid to Egypt, quote, in all forms, which includes the $1.3 billion worth of aid Washington sends to Egypt every year.
We've sustained our commitment to Egypt and its people. But while we want to sustain our relationship with Egypt, our traditional cooperation cannot continue as usual when civilians are being killed in the streets and rights are being rolled back.
Morsi, Egypt's first democratically elected president, has been held in detention since his ousting on July 3rd. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
As Korea continues to sweat under scorching temperatures, it's not just a number of heat stroke patients that are on the rise. More people find it hard to cope with the huge temperature differences between the indoors and outdoors and are showing cold-like symptoms, chronic fatigue, and headaches. Kim Min-ji has more on ways to prevent yourself from falling victim to air conditioning-itis.
During the hot summer months, life without air conditioning is unimaginable. And workplaces are not an exception. Suffering from lack of sleep due to tropical nights, employees come to work with headaches and are unable to concentrate.
I have a headache and sore throat. My overall condition is not so good.
Long hours of air conditioning can also reduce the humidity in a room, causing dry skin and dry eyes.
I feel quite drowsy. My skin is also very dry, and it is showing signs of acne.
Extended use of air conditioning brings cold-like symptoms such as headaches, fatigue, indigestion, and nausea. The so-called air conditioning-itis, or Legionnaires, is caused by the body's inability to cope with the differences in temperature when moving from a cool place to a warm place, or the other way around. Doctors say that our bodies can endure a temperature difference of about 5 degrees Celsius. When the difference is greater, our body reacts by producing heat, which can provoke fatigue and drowsiness.
If the difference between the indoor and outdoor temperatures exceed 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, our bodies will find it hard to adjust, causing immunity levels to drop. an increase in the spread of viruses.
When exposed to air conditioning, our bodies can be infected by a virus known as Legionella, which spreads in dry and enclosed areas and causes fever and nausea. Experts advise people to turn off their air conditioning every 2 hours and open the windows for ventilation for about 5 minutes. They advise people to clean air conditioners or fans properly before use and avoid the cool air from directly blowing towards the body. 김민지, Arirang News.
The football fans in Korea and around the world are eagerly awaiting for the start of the English Premier League season.
And we have Stephen Che in the Sports Center to tell us which South Korean footballers we should be keeping an eye out for this year. Stephen.
Hey guys, the Premier League will open this weekend to much fanfare across the British Isles, but the buzz is gathering here as well, especially for the South Koreans on English teams. EPL stars such as Wayne Rooney, Luis Suarez, and Gareth Bale are hogging the headlines overseas, but here in Korea, the spotlight is on Ki Sung-yong, Kim Bo-kyung, Yoon Suk-young, and Park Ju-young. Ki has shown spots of brilliance, so will be looking for more consistency from the midfielder. Kim is looking to be a difference maker for Cardiff City's offense, while Yoon will be trying to make a name for himself on QPR. Now with that said, the question remains, will Park Ju-young and Arsenal part ways? The 28-year-old striker spent most of last season on loan to Celta Vigo in Spain after just a handful of appearances with the English side. Manager Arsene Wenger is dealing with the exodus of 17 players this summer, but even so, the prospects of Park seeing playing time are small. In the meantime, the South Korean footballer is staying at a London hotel and training for the upcoming season. And coming home, it's time to talk Friday night's KBO action. The Hanwha Eagles and the LG Twins squared off at Jamsil Stadium in Seoul. The bottom-dwelling Eagles were looking to trip up the fast-rising Twins. LG sends Raramez Liz to the mound, Hanwha, Yu Chang-sik. Speaking of Liz, he retires the first 6 batters. Then in the third, the Eagles' Ko Dong-jin singles to bring one home. Hanwha adds one later, 2-0 Eagles. Meanwhile, it's Yu. The Eagles pitcher makes quick work out of the Twins, holding the second-place team to just 2 hits. Until the 6th, a walk and a single put men on first and second with 1 out. Then Chung Wi-yoon, grounder to second. Is it a double play? No. The runner scores. It's 2-1 Eagles. And the Eagles go on to hold on to this one with a final score of 2-1. And looking at the scores from around the league, we have Tusan leading Kia 9-7 in the bottom of the 8th. NC over Samsung 3-1, and Lotte defeating Nexon 9-3. This has been Stephen Choi, and this does it for me in the Sports Center. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
Time for the latest weather update with our Kwon So-ah. So, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, guys. Temperatures in the mid-30s have become the norm these days, but maybe you noticed that Daegu doesn't seem to be the hottest place in the country anymore.
You're right, So-ah. So why is that?
Well, it hasn't been proven yet, but reports say it may be because Daegu has been planting thousands of trees since the 1990s.
Wow, very interesting, and certainly makes sense that trees would cool things down a bit.
It sure does. The sensible temperature, in fact, can be 5 degrees lower than the actual one if you're standing beneath a tree. Now, although we had high numbers this week, the humidity levels were lower than last week. The high pressure in the North Pacific has led to mainly clear skies nationwide with hardly any rain, just a few passing showers. Now, similar weather is in the picture for the weekend, but on Sunday night, it'll begin to rain in the central regions, leading to a nationwide relief from the heat next week. So I hope the following numbers won't make you sigh too much, because tomorrow it will be pretty hot at 37 and 35 degrees respectively in Daegu and Gwangju, while Seoul and Busan reach 33. And moving over to Daejeon and Jeju, which will both hit 34 degrees. Dokdo and Gyeonggang will be a bit cooler than that. And that's the forecast for now, but I'll be very glad to see you back here after midnight.
Thank you, Soa. And that's our broadcast on this Friday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.